Hey guys, tonight we sail gently along the ancient Nile, on a boat with eyes that watch the river. Ahead more closely than you ever could. The sun dips low behind the palm fronds, the air smells like warm clay, shallow water, and something faintly fishy, like time never quite washed itself clean. You hear a wooden creak under your toes. There's no motor, no light switch, and no GPS. Just you, this boat, and the eternal murmur of reeds rustling secrets. Painted eyes stare ahead from the boat's prow wide, almond-shaped, rimmed in bold black, and utterly unblinking. You'd think they were there to help the boat see. In fact, that's exactly what they were for. Welcome to a world where objects weren't just tools. They were living things with spirit and intention. Boats were no exception. You probably won't survive this journey not because it's dangerous, but because we're about to sail into a history so dry, so slow, and so oddly soothing that your brain might give up halfway and slide directly into sleep mode. That's okay. That's kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I want to see who's tuning in from the earliest sunrise and the latest midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The boat wobbles as you shift your weight. The Nile isn't a wild river, it glides, thick and patient, like it's not in a rush because it knows it has eternity. You lean over the side, watching the muddy water catch threads of pink sky above the boat's prow. The painted eyes reflect that sky back to you. Twin oracles with smudged eyeliner. They don't blink. They don't flinch. They're just watching. And the truth is, no one's entirely sure why. Historians still argue whether those eyes were meant to protect, guide, or simply impress the gods. Were they borrowed from earlier cultures? Were they meant to help the boat see hazards like a sandbank, a river spirit, or a crocodile feeling spicy? Or were they there to guard the soul of whoever was sailing? What we do know, these eyes weren't random. They were standard. They appear on paintings, carvings, and even model boats tucked into tombs like toys for the dead. You'll see them on simple fishing skiffs and massive royal barges. Always those eyes, always facing forward. It's the ancient Egyptian version of "let's not risk it." And you, floating quietly in the dusk, are starting to see why. Because it's dark under the Nile, and things move there. You hear something splash softly off the left side of the boat. You freeze. You stare. The eyes on the boat stare too. You tell yourself it's probably just a fish, or a turtle, or one of those hippos that look cute until they ruin someone's week. Maybe you're just imagining it, but those painted eyes, they're not flinching. You remember that in Egyptian mythology, the eye wasn't just a body part, it was a symbol of power. The eye of Horus could heal. The eye of Ra could destroy. The eye could hunt your enemies, ward off curses, and guide you through death's door. If you were building a boat to carry a soul, or a goat, or a pile of jars filled with beer and pickled onions, why wouldn't you paint eyes on it? One fringe theory, and yes, there's always one, involves mushroom-induced visions of river spirits that guided boats to safety. Some archaeologists gently suggest it's more likely symbolic protection. Others just shrug and point to the giant crocodiles that made everyone nervous. But the point is this: ancient Egyptians didn't separate the sacred from the practical. If you were sailing down a divine river, in a boat, hand-carved by men who chanted protection spells into the planks, with the scent of resin, incense, and goat hair glue rising in the sun, you were gonna give that boat eyes, because it needed to see, especially when you couldn't. And now, drifting farther into the night. You're glad those painted eyes are watching, because the moon is rising, the river is deepening, and even the air feels like it's holding its breath. The Nile isn't just a river, it's the river. You've probably seen maps of Egypt, a green ribbon stitched down the middle of a beige bedsheet. That ribbon, that's the Nile. Without it, nothing grows, nothing moves, nothing survives. Ancient Egyptians didn't just live near the Nile, they owed the Nile everything. You trudge along the shore at dawn now, barefoot in sand that clings like warm flour. There's no village yet, no pyramid, No temple, just a handful of reed huts and some carved paddles stuck upright in the dirt like lazy spears. But already, the Nile rules here. It decides what can grow and when. It floods in its own time and leaves behind a gift, a thin smear of dark, salty soil that smells like iron and promise. That soil, it's literally called Kemet the Black Land. It's where Egypt gets one of its ancient names. You bend to touch it. It stains your fingers in a way that feels permanent. And in this world, the Nile wasn't just a waterway, it was a deity, one with moods. People gave it offerings, sang it hymns, and watched its level the way you check the weather app before a picnic. If it didn't flood enough, famine. Too much, disaster. Just right, civilization. This sacred dependence is why the Nile ran right through religion, politics, and daily life. Temples were aligned with it. Trade followed its curves. Farmers planted by its calendar. And boats. Of course, boats were everywhere. But not just for moving stuff. Boats were how the dead reached the afterlife. They were metaphors for time, for resurrection, even for the sun itself. Remember, Ra, the sun god, sailed a solar barkie across the sky each day. At night, he plunged beneath the earth and rode a ghostly vessel through the underworld, battling chaos, serpents, and bad vibes. The Nile was a sacred conveyor belt. You didn't just use it, you joined a ritual every time you pushed off from shore. And so, back to those boat eyes. When you stepped aboard, you weren't just thinking about fish or freight. You were entering a current that pulsed through heaven and hell. The boat needed to be ready. And if your own eyes couldn't see what lay ahead, divine or otherwise, you gave the boat its own. Funny detail? Ancient Egyptian artists often exaggerated important body parts. Pharaohs got big chests and narrow waists. Gods got too many arms. And eyes. Eyes got emphasized a lot. There's even evidence that some statues had eye sockets inlaid with crystal or obsidian to make them shimmer ominously. So naturally, when you paint a boat, you give it two huge unease. Protective, hyper-alert peepers. One mainstream theory suggests the eyes help the boat see its way safely, especially through foggy, reedy stretches where crocodiles lurked and sandbars sneered. Another idea, the eyes were directional. If you painted them on only one side of the prow and didn't match both sides, the boat might become spiritually confused, like giving a car only one headlight and asking it to drive straight. Historians still argue whether these painted eyes originated with Egypt or were borrowed from even older river cultures. Mesopotamian, maybe, but no matter their source, once Egypt embraced them, they became unavoidable. You've seen enough tomb art by now. Rows of boats gliding through blue lines that represent water, each with a pair of staring eyes. Even the model boats' tiny wooden toys buried with nobles had painted eyes. It's like the ancient Egyptian version of those fuzzy dice people used to hang from rear-view mirrors. Except fuzzier dice can't fight river demons. You pause by a trading boat now, half unloaded at the muddy dock. The hull is caked in dried algae, scratched by long trips and short tempers. But up front, those eyes are still crisp. Someone repainted them, maybe yesterday, maybe that morning, because you never knew which trip would be your last. The Nile could flip moods without warning. One day, it's smooth. The next, a crocodile slams into your hull, or a sandbar rises just enough to gut the boat's bottom. The water looked gentle, but underneath, chaos writhed. And that's where the spiritual side creeps back in. Egyptian religion was obsessed with Ma'at, cosmic balance, order, truth. Everything had to be in alignment. So your boat wasn't just a vehicle, it was part of that balance, an extension of your body, your intention, and it needed protection. You look out across the water again. Twilight glows on the surface like liquid copper. A distant heron takes off, trailing silence behind its wings. The boat's eyes stare into that glow. Twin reminders that even on a river this old, this sacred, the unknown is always just ahead. You drift farther down the river now, and the sky is heavy with that purplish blue before full night. When shapes lose their edges and shadows stretch in strange directions, the boat rocks gently beneath you, its motion so steady it might as well be breathing. The painted eyes at the prow still face forward, alert and unblinking, as if scanning for threats you haven't noticed yet. And you start to wonder, what exactly was there to be afraid of? You don't have to look far. The Nile, for all its gifts, was home to an entire cast of creatures that would make any modern horror movie director whistle in approval. Crocodiles longer than your mattress. Hippos with personalities best described as chaotic neutral, leaning toward, I'll destroy your canoe for fun. Add to that snakes, sandstorms, flash floods, and the occasional case of river-based divine judgment. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the luxury of assuming things were just random. If something went wrong, a boat capsized, someone fell overboard and didn't come back, it meant something. Maybe a god was offended. Maybe a spirit slipped on board. Maybe someone didn't paint the boat's eyes properly, and now the boat couldn't see the danger ahead. It wasn't superstition, it was survival strategy. Eyes, they believed, could do more than see. Eyes could repel. That's where things get interesting. You know, the Eye of Horus, right? That stylized, curving eye you see on amulets, t-shirts, and probably one guy's calf tattoo. In ancient Egypt, it was called the wedjat. It symbolized healing, protection, and restoration. According to myth, Horus lost his eye in a fight with Set, the god of chaos. The eye was later magically restored, and in doing so, it became a kind of eternal shield, not just for Horus, but for anyone who invoked it. Now, imagine painting something like that onto your boat. Not just decoration, not even just a set of mystical headlights, but a weapon, a stare so spiritually potent it could send bad vibes packing. There's even fringe speculation, brace yourself, that the act of painting the eyes was ritualistic. Like, specific prayers had to be spoken, specific pigments used, maybe even painted during certain phases of the moon. Some Egyptologists laugh it off as dramatic guesswork, but others quietly point to temple scrolls where colors like red ochre for warding off poison or blue from lapis for clarity are mentioned repeatedly. Historians still argue whether these eye paintings were uniform government policy, unlikely, or a tradition carried forward by local builders and priests. But the result was the same, a fleet of boats sailing the Nile, every one of them wide-eyed and watching, and sometimes those eyes were tested. There are stories half legend, half stone tablet of priests who journeyed upriver during droughts, carrying offerings and apologies to temples miles away. These journeys could take days, sometimes weeks, and the river grew stranger the farther you went. No towns, no docks, just black water and white stars. It's said some boats came back with their crews silent and pale, too shaken to speak. Others didn't come back at all. But the eyes always remained. You pass one of those stories now etched in crumbling wall relief on the side of a half-drowned shrine near the bank. You see a boat gliding toward an ominous shape, its prow lifted just slightly above the waves. The eyes are huge, exaggerated, as if to say, we saw it coming. And sometimes that was enough, because sight, in ancient Egypt, was tied to power. The gods watched you, the pharaoh watched you, the dead watched you. Everything watched everything. To be seen was to be known was to be judged. So the eyes on your boat, they weren't just decorative, they were your defense attorney. And in the quiet dark, with the reeds whispering secrets and the air thick with river scent, you're glad they're there. You're tired, yes, but not entirely safe. The Nile doesn't make promises. It just flows. One soft splash behind you, then another. You turn slowly. Nothing. But the eyes are still forward-facing, still watching, still ready. The boat you're on now is no royal barge, no funerary vessel. It's simpler, long, low, lovingly crude. But it floats, and when you crouch down to study its construction, you begin to understand just how deeply clever ancient Egyptian boat builders really were. The wood under your fingertips feels dry and splintery, baked by centuries of sun. But originally, it would have been sealed with resin and tied in places with rope made from palm fibers or flax. Egypt, despite all its grandeur, didn't have forests of big trees. Timber was rare, expensive, imported when possible. So early boats, before the fanciest cedar ships arrived, were made of bundled papyrus reeds, lashed together and shaped into soft curves that mimicked the river's flow. You can almost smell it. Sun-warmed reeds, sticky resin, and wet rope. Boats made with breath, prayer, and whatever the desert didn't steal first. Now, here's where the boat eyes become even more interesting. Those fragile papyrus boats, they needed all the help they could get. They bent with the current, creaked under cargo, and weren't built for battle, so adding painted eyes symbols of protection, guidance, divine awareness was like slapping on a supernatural life vest. You're tracing a black curve now. The paint around the left eye, it's thick, matte, and a little uneven, applied by hand. Of course, likely with a small reed brush or even someone's fingers. There was no factory churning these out. Each set of eyes had a personality, some wide and owl-like, others sharp and feline, but all had that same forward gaze, expectant, calm, slightly accusatory, don't crash me into a sandbar, idiot kind of way. The lines remind you of Kohl eyeliner, and that's not a stretch. Mainstream historians point out that the boat eyes bear resemblance to the eye makeup worn by both men and women in ancient Egypt. That stylized shape, the dark outline, the upward flick wasn't just fashion, it had function. Protection from the sun, from infection, from evil. And again, here's the fun part. Historians still argue whether the eye shapes used on boats directly mimicked that cosmetic tradition or came from a separate symbolic system. Some say the shapes mirrored the Eye of Horus. Others claim it was a generalized symbol of divine watchfulness, adapted over generations. And yet, you notice that even the earliest boat models found in tombs, some dating back to 2600 BCE, had simple eye motifs, sometimes barely more than dots or ovals carved into the prow. But they were there. That design choice, humble as it seems, survived dynasties, droughts, conquests, and shifting religious tides. Even when the boat itself barely held together, the eyes stayed painted. You're suddenly aware of how quiet it is on the river now. No voices, no birds, just the brush of current against the hull and the soft lap-lap of water on wood. It's easy to feel timeless here, like you could blink and open your eyes in 1250 BCE, drifting past temple pylons and fields of wheat, and nobody would question your presence so long as your boat had eyes. And just maybe, that's the point. The painted eyes helped mark your boat as part of the sacred system. It said, I belong here. I'm seen. I see. Let me pass. A fringe theory, one that makes mainstream Egyptologists wince slightly, suggests that some boats even spoke through their eyes. Not literally, of course, but symbolically. Eyes were expressive. And in temple rituals, the act of opening the eyes of a statue was a known ceremony. Priests would touch the statue's eyes and speak words that invited the god to enter it, giving the statue life. Some believe boats may have received a similar blessing. The eyes weren't just decoration, they were activation. You press your palm to the side of the boat and feel its warmth from the day's sun, still clinging like a memory. You don't know what prayers, if any, were whispered into this wood, but you do know this. The eyes are looking for something. Maybe the way home, maybe just the next safe bend in the river. And as the boat glides onward, you begin to see faint torchlight on the shore flickering amber through the reeds. A village. You've made it. The boat saw you there. And in the eyes' silent watch, you feel a strange kind of gratitude. The torchlight fades behind you now, swallowed by night and distance. As your boat slips back into the hush of the Nile, you're no longer thinking of villages or markets or fresh bread sold from reed baskets. You're thinking about those eyes again, and how they weren't just guardians, they were tools. Because in ancient Egypt, magic wasn't some fringe hobby, it was infrastructure. They called it heika. Not hocus pocus, not rabbit in a hat, but a divine force that flowed through everything. Gods used it, kings wielded it, and ordinary people, farmers, midwives, boatmen invoked it when they needed a little extra help, a healing spell, a fertility charm. A curse muttered under your breath while stepping on a Lego brick heka covered it all. And eyes. Eyes were full of heika. That's why you find yourself remembering a strange little scene scratched into a faded wall. Inside a temple ruin, a priest standing beside a boat, pressing his fingers to its eyes while whispering something you can't quite read. Maybe he's blessing it. Maybe he's warning it. Maybe both. Because here's the thing. In Egyptian belief, the eye didn't just see you, it knew you. And knowing carried weight. This idea isn't confined to art. Even in their written language, hieroglyphs, the eye symbol appears constantly, loaded with layers of meaning. There's the Eye of Horus, sure, but also eyes used in verbs like to watch, to protect, to appear, and even to favor. The act of seeing and being seen had moral consequences. You glance again at the prow. The eyes, painted thick and solemn, have a presence, not flashy, just there. And you start to wonder, were there ever boats that sailed without eyes? The answer, yes, a few. And guess what happened? Well, historians still argue whether the lack of painted eyes caused bad luck or merely coincided with it, but several accounts scattered across Ostraka and tomb wall notes describe ships that mysteriously sank, veered off course, or arrived late after their eyes were scraped off by mistake. One ancient dock worker even wrote, in a scratched limestone note, "No eye, no journey." Simple, direct, slightly ominous. And it's not just Egypt. You start to notice that similar boat eye traditions pop up all around the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians did it. The Greeks definitely did it. The Romans copied it. And even today, some fishing boats in Greece and Malta still wear stylized eyes on the prow, usually wide, round, and painted in thick white. It's as if that old fear that the boat can't see its path never quite left us. Fringe theory time. One researcher who probably drinks a lot of coffee once proposed that painting the eyes was less about religious belief and more about neural projection, meaning humans naturally assign perception to things with faces. So a boat with eyes feels safer, more alive, more trustworthy. But whether it's psychological or spiritual, the result is the same. You begin to feel like the boat is with you, and that brings you to something deeply human. You've seen it in photos of astronauts naming their spacecraft, in truck drivers with bobbleheads on their dashboards, in little kids whispering secrets to their teddy bears. We name things, we see them. And in Egypt, you painted eyes on your boat because it was no longer just wood and nails. It was a companion. It was your guardian on a river full of sharp rocks and hungry gods. You lie back now, staring at the stars. The river rocks gently beneath you, and the boat, with its eyes ever open, just keeps gliding. The boat sees for both of you. It sees the danger, the destination, and all the silent space in between. Dawn creeps in without asking permission. One moment, you're wrapped in blue-black stillness. The next, there's a soft wash of gold over the water, and the boat is painted in light. The eyes catch the sunrise first. They're already awake, already staring down the river like they knew it was coming. And maybe they did. Because in ancient Egypt, boats weren't just for the living. Gods rode them too. You sit up slowly, joints creaking like old rope, and let your gaze follow the soft ripples. Far ahead, in your mind's eye, another vessel sails not built by human hands, but by cosmic ones. It's the Manjet, the solar bark of Re, the sun god himself. Each morning, Ra is born from the eastern horizon and sails his golden boat across the sky. Each night, he disappears into the underworld, the Duat, and boards a second, shadowy vessel, the Mesektet, to navigate the 12 terrifying hours of night. And let's be clear, this wasn't a joyride. During his nightly journey, Ra had to fight Apophis, the chaos serpent, every single night. An endless battle of order versus chaos, light versus darkness. The sun rose each day only because Ra won. Again and again and again. No pressure. Now, think about the implications of that myth. The boat wasn't just a means of travel, it was a battlefield, a stage, a vessel through which gods expressed will, fought enemies, and preserved existence. It was sacred architecture in motion. You suddenly picture the painted eyes again, not as decoration, but as weapons, not just to ward off crocodiles and ill winds, but to see evil coming before it could strike. Maybe that's why no solar bark in temple reliefs is ever eyeless. Because blindness is weakness, and on the river of night, weakness gets swallowed. There's a quirky historical tidbit here too. Egyptians sometimes built massive ceremonial boats that never touched water. These were solar barks, crafted entirely of wood, gold, and precious materials, stored in temple sanctuaries. Priests would carry them on festival days, parading them through the streets as if to say, "Look, even the gods need good transportation." And yes, painted eyes, always included. Historians still argue whether these god boats were intended as real stand-ins for divine vessels or just theatrical props. But regardless, the consistency is striking. Whether made for a farmer crossing a canal or a deity traversing the heavens, the boats always had eyes, always. You recline again, imagining Ra's glowing ship skimming across the pink sky above you, a fleet of stars trailing behind. You don't need a telescope. You don't even need belief. Just the idea that every sunrise might be a result of some ancient divine traffic is enough to make you squint up in sleepy awe. Another boat passes you now, heading in the opposite direction. You nod to the figure at the helm wrapped in a linen tunic, face half-shadowed. No words are spoken, but the boats acknowledge each other, silently, eye to eye. It's a strange kind of peace, because deep down, you get it. Boats are fragile. Life is weirder than we admit, and sometimes a little divine assistance, even if it's just too wide. Painted eyes on a worn piece of wood makes the journey feel less lonely. You touch the prow again. The paint is chipped, cracked, maybe even fading, but the eyes are still watching. And you, dear listener, are still being carried. You dock now, not at a grand port or shining temple, but at a crumbling landing of sun-bleached stone and crooked posts wrapped in old rope, the kind of place where traders grumble about goats and fishermen spit into the Nile to test the wind. It smells like fish, mildew, and papyrus leaves left out too long in the sun. And still, the eyes remain. The boat's prow points toward the dock, and its gaze cuts through the river mist like it's sizing up the shoreline. And maybe it is. You step off carefully, one sandal at a time, and glance back just once to find those eyes still fixed forward. Like they know this isn't a rest stop, it's a pause between stories. Nearby, two men are hunched over a plank of wood. One holds a brush made from bundled reeds. The other dips it into a shallow bowl of black paint. The smell hits you first, acrid and earthy, iron oxide, maybe, or soot mixed with animal fat. They're not decorating for beauty. They're working with intent. You kneel beside them, watching as the painter outlines a curve, then the tear duct, then the upward tail sharp, like a hawk's blink. You notice the painter's hand trembling slightly, not from age, but reverence. Because this isn't just boat maintenance. This is ritual. You ask, gently, why the eyes matter so much. The older man shrugs and says something simple in a dialect you barely grasp, something like, if it cannot see, it will not return. You feel that sentence in your spine. Here's a detail most textbooks skip. There's evidence that some boats weren't allowed to launch until their eyes were complete. Records from certain temple ports mention delays days, even weeks, because the protective sign was not yet painted. The sign, of course, was the eye. One fringe theory suggests there were specialized eye painters, craftsmen, who only did this one job, passed down in families, kind of like tattoo artists. But their clients were vessels, not skin. Some argue these painters chanted phrases while they worked, possibly invoking gods like Wadjet or Sekhmet, eye deities in their own right. Historians still argue whether these rituals were uniform across Egypt or more regional. Upper Egypt, for example, favored different stylistic flares, longer lines, more angular. Lower Egypt's eyes were often softer, rounder, owl-like style. Even in protection, had geography, and not all eyes were black. Some were painted in dark green, a pigment derived from malachite symbolizing life, fertility, and rebirth. Others used red ochre, linked to energy and protection but also chaos, depending on the context, which is fun. Because in Egyptian magic, something could both protect and destroy, depending on who held it. You touch the nearly finished eye now. It's sticky, fresh, a little messy, but powerful. You get the sense that the moment this paint dries, the boat becomes complete, a full participant in the spiritual ecosystem of the Nile. You wander farther into the dock area, noticing how many boats are pulled onto shore for repainting. Some have their eyes scraped off old, faded, flaked away by time. Others are half done, with only one side complete, looking tragically lopsided. You wonder, is a half-eyed boat like a one-eyed person still strong, but a little off balance? Then you see something unexpected, a boat with no eyes at all. It's smaller than the others, narrow, hastily built. Its hull warped slightly at the middle. Maybe a workboat, maybe a reject. You feel uneasy just looking at it. The absence is loud. You turn away, heading back to your vessel, where the freshly painted eyes now gleam in the sun. They're drying fast, cracking just slightly at the edges. You nod to the painter. He doesn't smile, but he pats the side of the boat like a dog that's just been taught to heel. And then you're off again, drifting, watched, safe. The boat glides past groves of date palms and low mud brick storehouses that seem to rise out of the riverbank like half-finished dreams. The eyes at the prow catch every glimmer on the water's surface, every shimmer of fish just below, every curious ibis watching from shore. But this time, the river isn't just ferrying you past the everyday. You're passing into memory, into ceremony. A deep drumbeat hums faintly in your mind, steady and slow, as if the river itself were pulsing with grief. Ahead, another boat comes into view, bigger than yours, smoother, draped in linen. Papyrus blossoms tucked into its side rails. Its passengers stand still, arms crossed over linen robes. And lying in the center, beneath a canopy woven with gold thread and blue lapis shapes, a body. This is a funerary bark. You don't speak. You don't need to. The air around it is already doing the work. You feel the hush of it, the silence thick and sacred. And at the front of that boat, painted in dazzling precision, eyes, sharper, more symmetrical, larger than usual, as if to say, we will see you safely to the other side. Because in Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was just another river crossing. And boats, especially ones like this, weren't merely transportation. They were symbolic bridges, vehicles between the now and the forever. You drift alongside for a moment, watching the gentle bob of the boat. There's incense smoke curling upward like a thread to the sun. There are two priests at the rear, chanting something you don't understand, but it tugs at you anyway. And the boat doesn't flinch. It sails forward as if on tracks, eyes leading the way into the horizon. This wasn't rare. Nobles, priests, even wealthy merchants. Anyone with the means arranged for a funerary bark to take them west. The West, in Egyptian cosmology, wasn't just a direction, it was the land of the dead, where the sun set, where the souls went. The beautiful West, they called it. And just like the god Ra made his nightly journey through the underworld, the deceased would make their final ride by boat, first in body, then in spirit. Of course, only a select few should afford the kind of elaborate floating temple you're watching now. Most had modest river journeys, or symbolic models buried in tombs. But even those tiny wooden replicas, they had painted eyes, because in the afterlife, the journey mattered just as much. Mainstream historians agree. Model boats were among the most common tomb inclusions for centuries. Some tombs had over a dozen, each representing a different function: fishing boat, grain bark, military escort. All had eyes. One particularly striking model, now sitting in a museum far from the Nile, shows a fishing boat with wide, staring eyes and a miniature crew, each figure frozen mid-motion. They knew their job, even in death. And here comes the quirky bit. Archaeologists have found evidence that some tomb models were updated later. A family member might return and repaint the eyes if they'd faded. Because nobody wanted Uncle Setep to drift through the afterlife without vision, historians still argue whether those repainted models were devotional acts or simple habit. Was it piety, or just a traditional chore? Back on your boat, you watch the funerary bark until it slips into the mist, disappearing like a breath held too long. You sigh and lean forward. The eyes on your own vessel, still drying from earlier, seem sharper now, as if they watched that other boat with quiet recognition, perhaps even jealousy. After all, not every boat gets to carry someone home. You rest your hand on the wood. It's warm again, steady. The water stretches wide and still ahead of you, eyes forward. Always forward. The wind shifts just slightly now, curling from the west and rustling the papyrus reeds like old secrets being whispered to the shoreline. Your boat catches the breeze gently, rocking a little more than before. But the eyes, those freshly painted, ever-watchful eyes, remain steady, fixed on whatever comes next. And yet, you start to wonder, what happens when the eyes aren't enough? Because for all their painted protection, Egyptians didn't exactly stop at just two symbols on a boat's prow. No, they layered defenses like onions, spiritual onions. And once you start peeling, it gets weird. in a fun, am I really awake for this kind of way. You begin noticing other details carved into the wood, faint symbols along the inner frame. Maybe a scarab beetle, a solar disk, or a pair of anks looped into the grain. These weren't just decoration. They were part of a larger protective arsenal. Because when you sail through a world shaped by gods, demons, and floods that show up 3 weeks early, you don't leave things to chance. You reach down beside a coil of rope and find it tucked between the oars. A small bundle of dried herbs wrapped in linen. Smells like something between incense and onions. Yes, onions. Because one of the more curious rituals involved hanging onions on boats to ward off sickness and evil spirits, their strong scent was believed to scare away the wrong kind of energy, especially the kind that might slip on board uninvited. You imagine a boat bobbing down the river, eyes painted sharp on the front, and onions swinging from the mast like little spicy sentinels. There were also chants. If you were especially devout or especially anxious, you might have hired a priest to recite incantations over your boat before setting off. Words mattered. Naming the dangers gave you some power over them. There's even a text that describes a protective formula to be whispered into the hull, followed by 7 drops of oil and 1 of beer. Rituals with seasoning. Historians still argue whether these extra protections were standard practice or reserved for high-status voyages, but tomb records and the temple archives confirm their presence across time. The logic seems clear. If you were putting something in motion, a body, a bride, a bushel of lentils, you were going to protect it. Even regular folks got in on the act. Poorer travelers might tie charms to their oars or smear mud mixed with donkey hair on the bow. Which, look, it's not glamorous. But in the world of ancient folk magic, donkey hair was sort of the duct tape of protective ingredients. And if you were transporting something especially valuable like temple goods, sacred oils, or high-grade papyrus, additional wards might be painted directly onto the crates. One surviving example, a shipping box marked with the Eye of Horus on every visible side. Talk about thorough. You wonder if the delivery driver got paid extra. You smile to yourself, imagining ancient customs officers checking spiritual cargo compliance. Back on your boat, you lean against the side and listen to the rhythmic slap of oars from somewhere upriver. Another vessel, getting closer. It appears a moment later, smaller than yours, loaded with fishing gear. Its canvas canopy frayed at the corners. No gold, no incense, just tools and sweat. But still, there they are. Painted eyes on the front, faded, chipped, but clearly present. The fisherman nods as he passes. His eyes meet yours only for a second. But somehow, the gaze of his boat lingers longer. You realize then that the eyes were never just for protection. They were for recognition, a way for boats to say, I am part of this river. I have the right to be here. The sun rises higher. Your boat adjusts course, following the current's gentle curve. The onions, yes. You have some now rustle faintly in the breeze. And as the wind whistles through the reeds, you feel something settle inside you, quiet, ancient, and aware. You're seen. You're sailing. You're safe. You've grown used to the rhythm of the Nile now, its slow turns, its warm breath, its glassy silences. You might even say you're part of it. Another quiet passenger among the reeds and temples and sunburnt ghosts. But then voices, not Egyptian ones, not chants or prayers or dockside haggling. These voices are louder, sharper, accented in a way that doesn't quite belong here. You look across the river and spot a small crowd gathering near a stone pier, robes in unfamiliar patterns, sandals laced differently, and among them a boat, not large, not grand, but unmistakably foreign. And yet, it has eyes. You drift closer, just enough to eavesdrop without intruding. The crowd is made up of Greeks, early tourists, traders, mercenaries. They came down to Egypt in waves after Alexander waltzed through with his hair and hubris and declared the whole place his. Some settled, some married in, some just came to stare. And stare they did at the monuments, the animals, the gods, the weird rituals, and especially at the boats. There's a snippet of papyrus written by one such Greek traveler, Hecataeus, maybe, or someone equally unimpressed, who described strange boats on the Nile with painted eyes, as if the river must be watched or it would escape. It was meant to be sarcastic, but honestly, it's kind of poetic. because the Greeks, while puzzled, eventually adopted the practice themselves. Soon enough, Aegean boats bore similar painted eyes rounder, more exaggerated, like cartoonish guards glaring into the blue. Historians still argue whether the Greeks stole the idea outright or developed their own symbolic version based on seafaring superstitions, but the timing lines up suspiciously. Once enough Greek ships traveled up and down the Nile, the idea spread like sunscreen at a beach day. You turn your attention back to the boat docked near the crowd. Its eyes are different. Thicker brushstrokes, less elegance, but still alert, still watching. One man leans against the hull, arms crossed, looking confused. "Why paint eyes on wood?" he asks in Greek, half laughing. Another shrugs. "So it doesn't bump into ghosts." Fair enough. And here's a quirky little crossover. In some parts of the Greek world, especially later, in Hellenistic port towns, it became common to paint eyes not just on boats, but on drinking vessels, cups with stylized eyes. You'd lift it to your face, and boom, now you had extra eyes. The logic. To ward off evil while drinking, and probably to spook your friends just a little. You smile at the thought of some party guest nervously sipping wine from a wide-eyed mug while watching a one-eyed boat drift past outside. The Egyptians, though, they weren't always impressed. There are temple walls still stained with soot and pigeon droppings where scribes carve complaints about foreigners ignoring the rites. Some grumbled that the Greek versions of sacred symbols were sloppy, decorative instead of devotional, flashy instead of focused. But that's history. Everything gets borrowed, muddled, rebranded, and the eyes outlived it all. Because whether it's a priest's bark heading to Abydos or a Greek wine trader's skiff trying not to sink before sunset, those eyes still get painted, still gaze ahead, still do their silent, sacred job. You lean back against your boat now, sun warming your face. Another breeze passes through, lifting the edge of your tunic, ruffling the onion bundles still dangling like sleepy guardians from the mast. A nearby ibis screeches once offended, perhaps by the cultural confusion happening on shore. You close your eyes, but the boat doesn't. You open your eyes just as the current carries you into quieter waters. The river narrows slightly here, bending through cliffs streaked with chalk and shadow. It's cooler. The wind has stilled, and even the birds, usually loud and rude, seem to have taken a vow of silence. But the painted eyes on your boat, they stay sharp, as if they've seen this place before, maybe in another lifetime. You float past a half-collapsed tomb entrance near the waterline, barely visible behind tangled reeds. The stone is worn, its carvings softened by centuries of river breath. But there, etched into the wall in delicate lines, is the unmistakable outline of a boat. And yes, it has eyes. You can just make out the scene. A funeral procession. Priests standing along the shore. Mourners raising their hands in the formal gesture of grief. The boat carries a single figure beneath a canopy, and the eyes on its prow painted or carved stare straight ahead, undistracted, undisturbed. You've seen versions of this before. Museums, books, those weird beige documentaries from the 1980s narrated by men who never blink. But here, drifting beside it in the real air of Egypt, it hits differently. Because the eyes weren't just for the voyage of life. They came after. Ancient Egyptians believed your soul needed a boat in the afterlife. And if your family couldn't afford a real one, they buried you with a model. Some of these miniature boats were exquisitely detailed, right down to tiny ropes and miniature oarsmen carved with expressive little eyebrows. And yes, each one had painted eyes, like little ghost guides. Mainstream archaeologists have cataloged hundreds of these, some found in noble tombs, some in modest graves. A few were mass-produced, possibly even sold at mortuary markets, like early IKEA but spookier. Historians still argue whether these boats were meant to symbolize literal transportation or if they were more metaphorical, representing the soul's ability to move on rather than a specific journey. But either way, they were never eyeless, even when they were an inch long. One quirky discovery. A child's tomb in the outskirts of Abydos revealed a toy boat, crudely carved and worn smooth by tiny hands. It had one mismatched eye painted in blue ink. Just one. Sloppy. Sweet. Maybe the child painted it themselves. You can imagine that boat being pushed along puddles during flood season, guided by play, powered by imagination. And still, protected. Because that's what eyes do. You pass another shrine now. This one with water lapping at its steps. Someone left offerings there, dried lotus petals, a few clay pots, a carved ibis feather, and bobbing nearby, tethered to a broken post by a rope older than you care to guess, a model boat. It floats awkwardly, tilting a little too far to the left. Its hull is faded, its sail missing. But the eyes, still painted, still watching. And maybe that's all it takes. The belief that something even in miniature, even in memory can see you, guide you, carry you. You close your eyes again, just for a moment. The water laps. The boat rocks. The world holds still. The river widens again. Not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Like a long sigh after a good nap. The air is thicker here. Sweeter. You smell silt and wild mint. Charcoal from a distant hearth. Maybe even the burnt tang of incense drifting lazily from some hidden village shrine. But what catches your attention now isn't the water or the air. It's the chatter. You start to hear it before you see them, voices bobbing along the river, tangled with laughter, curses, and the gentle clunk of oars against hulls. Fishermen, not solemn priests or caravan merchants or high-sailed funerary crews, just ordinary people doing ordinary work, wading knee-deep into life with nets, hooks, and stories they've told 1,000 times. And every single one of their boats, some patched with bark, others cobbled together from leftover cedar, has eyes. You drift past them slowly. They barely notice. One is untangling a net that looks like it's made of the world's oldest shoelaces. Another is arguing with a boy who's clearly dropped the bait overboard. A third stands ankle-deep in fish, tossing them into a clay jar like it's just another Tuesday, which, to him, it is. But you notice something else. They've decorated their boats differently. Some eyes are huge and wide, like they're trying too hard to be intimidating. Others are squinty, tilted up at the edges, giving them an oddly smug expression. One boat has lashes painted on, fluttering in the breeze like they're headed to a regatta fashion show. And suddenly, the serious weight of the Eye of Horus softens just a bit, because here, protection is practical. Yes, the eye wards off evil. Yes, it guides and blesses, but it also becomes part of the boat's personality, a sort of nautical emoji. One old man waves to you from his skiff, his beard almost horizontal in the breeze. That one's named Red Eyes. He shouts, pointing at a boat with 2 crimson pupils and a cracked rudder. He only sinks when he's bored. You laugh, and he does too, loud, like the river hasn't ever scared him. Not once. It's a reminder. The sacred and the silly lived side by side in Egypt. People told jokes about Ra's bark getting stuck in underworld traffic. They gave nicknames to statues. They swatted flies away from ceremonial offerings. Daily life wasn't a never-ending hymn. It was fish guts and sunburns and figuring out how to paint an eyeball that didn't look like it was judging you. And the boats, they reflected that. Historians still argue whether some of these boat eyes were purely symbolic, or if, over time, they also became a sort of river badge, a quiet way of saying, hey, I know the rules. I belong here. Let me pass. You imagine a fisherman giving a suspicious side eye to a boat with no painted eyes? New guy. He'd mutter, watch him. Probably doesn't even offer fish to the river spirits. And then he'd toss a sardine overboard, just in case. You're beginning to think the river didn't just demand respect. It demanded participation. You had to be in it, a part of its culture, its quirks, its shared understanding that sometimes painting a pair of eyes on your boat was more than tradition. It was a language. And as you pass the last of the fishermen, their oars slicing lazy arcs in the water, you feel like you understand just a little more about how people survived, how they hoped, how they joked their way through danger with paint, onions, and lash-enhanced eyeballs, and how every boat, no matter how small, crooked, or covered in fish slime, wanted to be seen, and more importantly, wanted to see. The sun is high now, not blinding, but authoritative. It hangs overhead like a supervisor who doesn't need to yell. You just feel its presence and get back to rowing. The river glitters in that deceptive way water always does when it's hiding sharp rocks underneath. But your boat glides smooth, calm, and alert. Those eyes on the prow, they're still looking, still asking. And you're finally ready to ask back. What did they really mean? It's a deceptively simple question. You'd think, after all these miles, all these stories, there'd be a single answer. The eyes meant X, done. But no, because like most ancient symbols, the boat eyes meant more than one thing, sometimes all at once. And depending on who you ask, what era you're in, and how philosophical you're feeling that day, the answer changes. Mainstream scholars say they were protective, that they symbolized divine guidance, helped the boat see, and ensured safe passage. That's the clean, respectable explanation. You'll find it printed in museum plaques and polite textbooks. But then you talk to a different kind of expert, a temple scribe, a village priest, a fisherman who swears his uncle's boat went blind the day the paint chipped off. And suddenly, the eye isn't just a symbol, it's a warning, a request, a demand. Because to paint eyes on something isn't neutral. It says, this object is alive enough to look back, and in a culture obsessed with the seen and the unseen, where gods had animal heads, and the sky was a goddess arching over the earth. You didn't just put that kind of power anywhere. You placed it with purpose. There's an idea, whispered in late-night dig sites, and the weirder footnotes of archaeology journals, that the eyes weren't just about protection, they were about presence. They made the boat not just visible to the river, but visible to the gods. And being seen by a god in ancient Egypt, that wasn't always good. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians feared divine attention or craved it, because to be seen was to be acknowledged but also to be judged. If your boat bore eyes, it declared your voyage worth noticing. And if the gods were watching, you'd better not capsize. There's another theory, half mystic, half psychological, that the eyes acted as a mirror. They made you more aware that when you stepped aboard a boat with eyes, you subconsciously behaved better, steered straighter, respected the current, because something was watching. Sort of like how people behave when there's a camera in the room, or a toddler staring silently from across a table. You glance again at the painted eyes. They're weathered now, cracked slightly from the sun and spray, but they're still sharp enough to meet your gaze, and something about them feels familiar. You've seen them in other places, not just on boats, on tomb walls, on jewelry, on temple columns. The wedge cut that Eye of Horus painted again and again with all its strange geometry. Curved brow, extended tail, spiral under eye. But here's something peculiar. On boats, the eyes often aren't drawn in that sacred style. They're simpler, more animal-like, less god, more hawk or jackal. Some say they're modeled after falcons. Others say they're meant to resemble the eyes of crocodiles, riverborn creatures who knew the Nile in a way humans never could. And maybe that's it. Maybe the boat eyes weren't meant to be human at all. Maybe they were meant to be better, wilder, sharper, eternal. Because a human might miss a threat, might fall asleep, might steer toward danger without realizing it. But the boat would see, and it would carry you, eyes open, even when yours were closed. The afternoon light softens now, draping itself across the Nile like sheer linen. The river takes on that honey-colored glow that turns everything into a dream. Mud huts into gold, water into glass, and silence into story. Your boat moves slower here, not from fatigue. Boats don't get tired but from reverence. The current eases, the world hushes, and you feel the question rise again. Was it just Egypt? You glance at your vessel's prow. The painted eyes seem to twitch in the shadows, like they're listening, like they already know. Because the truth is, no, it wasn't just Egypt. You start to remember other boats, other waters, the Phoenicians. Those sea-loving merchants of the Levant painted stylized eyes on their ships, two big, circular ones, sometimes outlined in red or black, often exaggerated to the point of cartoonish charm. Their word for it, eyes of protection. They sailed as far as Spain, maybe even beyond, and never left port without painting a gaze onto their hulls. The Greeks, as we saw, adopted the habit, especially for their triremes warships with sharp bronze noses and crews stacked like sandals in a basket. Their eyes were different, though rounder, flashier, more decoration than doctrine, but still present, still watching. And the Romans, they copied everything, including this. Eyes on merchant vessels, especially in Mediterranean ports. Stylized, yes, but consistent. The message was clear, no matter where you sailed. A boat without eyes was like a warrior without armor. Historians still argue whether the practice spread outward from Egypt or developed independently in multiple cultures. Did the Nile inspire the world? Or was it just part of some ancient human instinct, this idea that anything meant to travel alone across uncertain depths should have a way to see? Some fringe thinkers go further. They trace the tradition eastward to early Indian rivercraft, to Chinese junks with dragon eyes painted on the bow, and southward into East Africa, where certain Swahili coastal boats still bear geometric eyes woven into their sails or carved into the sides. Even today, you can wander through Maltese harbors and find little fishing boats Luzu painted in vibrant primary colors, with wide eyes peering out from under arched brows. Locals call them Eyes of Osiris, though they likely came from Phoenician roots. Either way, they've survived thousands of years of sea spray and superstition. And now, you sit quietly in your little Egyptian boat, eyes faded but intact, floating on a river older than every city you've ever heard of. And it strikes you, maybe we've always wanted our vessels to see, because water is unpredictable. It shifts, it hides, it swallows. And whether you're crossing a sacred river in 1400 BCE or launching a fishing boat in 2025, the fear is the same. What if I miss something? What if I don't see the rock, or the storm, or the serpent? What if I sail blind? So you paint the eyes, you carve them, trace them, believe in them. Not because they actually see, but because, deep down, they make you see better. You lean forward now, watching the ripples ahead. The Nile is narrowing again, guiding you toward one last bend in the water. The wind is light, the shadows grow long, and the eyes on your boat look calm. They've seen this route before. You're nearing the end of the journey now. The Nile curves gently left, then right, as if offering a soft hand guiding you home. The breeze hums against your ear, like the slow exhale of a giant asleep beneath the reeds. The water grows shallower, darker, and stiller, less river, more reflection. And in that quiet, you finally notice what's changed. The eyes on the boat don't feel like decoration anymore. They feel like memory. They've watched every ripple, every ibis, every sunbeam that dared sneak between temple columns. They've seen funerals and floods, laughter and fear, sailors and fools and gods. They've outlived empires, and tonight, they see you. It's a strange thing to be watched by something you also created. But maybe that's what the eyes were always about. That mutual seeing, that silent agreement between maker and made. I'll look after you if you look ahead for me. You glide past one final marker, an old tree whose roots grip the bank like a clenched hand. Beside it, half swallowed by papyrus, lies another boat, rotted, broken, a skeleton of wood and vine. But even there, faint paint clings to the prow. Two eyes, barely visible, still watching. You realize then, the boats may crack, the paint may fade, but the idea of the eyes, that stays, that endures. Because as long as we move through the unknown, we'll want something to watch the way, even if that something is made of resin, pigment, and a bit of nerve. You lean back on your little vessel, let the last light warm your face. The journey's nearly done. The boat drifts gently toward shore. You smile, and for the first time, you stop staring ahead. Because the eyes have got it from here. Now the river stills. The sun dips lower, brushing the horizon with streaks of orange and bronze, like a closing eye lined with gold dust. The boat beneath you barely moves now. It rocks gently in the lull. More breath than motion, more memory than mass. You let your body settle into its shape, soft against the wood, your fingers trailing absent-mindedly through the cool, dark water. Far above, the first stars emerge quiet, patient, exactly where you left them. A breeze slips across your face, and you smell the faint sweetness of wild mint and warm stone. The painted eyes on the prow no longer seem to search. They simply rest, still open, yes, but softened now, less guardian, more companion. And so you do the same. Let the thoughts drift. Let the stories settle. You've sailed through history, myth, superstition, and salt. You've seen what the boat saw. And now, there's nothing left to do but close your own eyes. The Nile flows on. The boat knows the way. And somewhere, deep beneath the stillness, you feel the water hold you. Safe, soft, seen.